Started off as a PG podcast, but then Devin just kept on dropping shits and fucks, and now
That's right. We are live.
The ghost faced himself, Brandon Tanev.
This isn't like the start of last season when it was just it looked like the Canucks were just a beer league team not playing defense at all. And just before Chris goes, no, I'm kidding, Chris. You can actually go now.
No, hold on.
Oh, we had to give more time for coming on late. So.
I still had. Oh, hold on. All right. Chris, go, and then I got something else to say at the end.
So, an elf and a midget in 2 back-to-back games. Yeah, he's definitely on a friendship tour for sure.
Saying, oh yeah, I'm okay with him being, the 6'7" defenseman. No, he is a AHL defenseman right now.
Look, Shonky, don't mind Devin, okay? We all struggle with Devin, so you know.
Well, hello, and welcome to a Sunday edition of the Shifts and Pucks podcast. Of course, you can follow us on Twitter at Shifts and Pucks, Facebook.com Shifts and Pucks, YouTube.com Shifts and Pucks, Twitch.com Shifts and Pucks. You can subscribe wherever you get your audio, as well as on the Area 51 Sports Network, as we're here. And on Monday, we had a conversation with BCIT instructor Brian Reeb about the future of sports radio, as in the 2 markets that we cover in Calgary and in Vancouver, there is some question about what is going on. I would encourage you to listen to that conversation in and of itself. But Kent Wilson wrote a really strong thread on hockey content. And, with the questions of what is going on in the radio industry, I don't think in Vancouver, in Calgary, across Canada, there's a lot more people bringing up the idea of podcasts, blogs, writing as an option. And it's something that people are trying to make a little bit of money at, trying to get their niche at, trying to get their voice out there. And Kent Wilson has successfully done that. He has done that. Of course, he's the head of growth right now with RV Snapped. He does startups. He does digital marketing. And he's probably, I would say, one of the strongest voices of the Flames out there. And we're pleased to have him on now. Hello, Kent. How are you doing?
Hi, Kevin. Yeah, good. Thanks. Quite the intro.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I guess I'm always, it's a pretty competitive industry, and right now with a lot of people trying to get their voice out there. You didn't have to do this, but what inspired you to do these threads?
A lot of it was seeing what was happening in market for existing traditional broadcasting, like as you say, radio. Final 960 seems to be shedding talent all the time. There's seems to be creating a vacuum in terms of regional coverage of the Flames and probably sports in general. So I was thinking, what's going to happen when as traditional continues kind of to fail and pull back here, who's going to come in and fill that gap? And I think there's an opportunity for independent creators to do that.
Yeah, fair. To start that, it says Calgary sports media has seen a significant attrition over the last few years to the degree that we're likely to see a skeleton crew of local talent buttressed by nationally syndicated content. That represents a potential opportunity for indie creators and publications. And then you go on there. And I guess one of the and you divided this up in content, value, and then of course the big question: how do you make money? What right. For you, you've been pretty consistent at creating this content. How did you establish consistency for yourself? Like, what was the challenge for you being a consistent content creator?
Well, I've always been a writer, so it was easy. I had a proclivity for it in the first place. The first blog I ever started was actually with a couple of friends. They dropped off almost immediately in terms of writing, but it became a habit for me in 2 ways. One, just sharing your thoughts when things happen. Sports is a really good thing to make a habit out of because there's always something happening, especially in season. So there's always something to talk about. But the other habit I established was reading about sports a lot more, and not just game day stuff and beat writer stuff. There was sort of there was a prolific number of other writers doing interesting things in their own blogs back in the day when I started. So it became this thing where I was reading all of these interesting, smart people writing stuff I hadn't really heard before, and then taking that and being able to apply my own thoughts, opinions to what was happening. So it was sort of the two-step habit that established me when I started.
And how did you have, there's a lot of people that start and they don't feel confident about their writing, they don't feel confident about what they're saying, they get that there's that nervous energy about, and I've experienced it, that nervous energy of putting stuff out there and you're just not sure how people are going to feel about it, and getting that nerve. How did you overcome, what allowed you to overcome that and just keep going?
Yeah, I think the first thing to tell people who feel that is everyone feels that. Almost everyone, when they start, isn't completely sure what they're doing, is nervous setting foot into the public eye because you're putting yourself out there, and you will have people come up to you and say, you stink. It's inevitable, no matter how big you are, what you're doing. That's what happens. But you gain confidence over time. The big thing is just to get in the habit of doing it, and over time you'll look back at what you did when you first started and maybe be mildly embarrassed by it, but that's a good thing. It means you're getting better. But you can't overcome that without just doing it, unfortunately.
I've always looked at any podcast or any writing or anything that I've done, like just for me personally, as practice. Like, it's always practice. Like, it's probably not going to be the best thing that I've ever done, but it's always something that I can build on from the future, for the past, and build in the future. So I don't know if that's something that resonates with you, but I've kind of looked at it like it's practice. And, sometimes it's public practice, and, you get shamed at times or whatever, right? But and then the other part of that, I guess, is what holds some people back is the concept around criticism. And I think there's two levels to this. How do you take criticism, and how do you dismiss criticism? Because right now with Twitter, we know that people can just crap their opinion on, and they don't even need to show their particular face on a Twitter profile or a social media profile. They can say whatever the hell they want and feel, whatever, right? There's no emotion, there's no face-to-face to that. So how do you balance the two there?
Yeah, I think the way to consider it is there's two kinds of criticism. There is constructive, useful criticism from which you can draw feedback and you can have a discussion with the person. And then there's useless, personal, ad hominem criticism where someone just wants to spout ugly things at you and you can probably dismiss it out of hand. So you're hopefully you get both. The first kind can be difficult as well, but at least it can inform what you're doing. At least it can create a useful discussion around what you're doing. The second kind, and there is a lot of it on social media, obviously, and even back in the early blog days, you would have don't read the comments kind of days, but you do have to wade through the latter to get to the former, and the former is really helpful. Good criticism and feedback like that makes you better at what you're doing. Yeah,
for sure. And I think from people that you respect in the industry and getting the type of feedback that can build you to be better. I recently, as an example, just got some feedback on something I have a habit of doing on my podcast, and it was a stark criticism, and like I took it starkly, but I knew also it came from a place of love, and I think that's something that I think can be really important for people as well. I guess the other, just to blend into that, like just you talked about what's going on in the Calgary market. What are you, in terms of the criticisms or in terms of what people are talking about, how do you currently see the Calgary content, the Calgary Flames specific Twitter media sphere looking like, not Twitter sphere looking like, in terms of how they're seeing the team? And the reason I asked that in Vancouver, a lot of talk about how Canuck media, every little thing becomes an analyzation. When Jim Benning was here in Vancouver, we had situations that I felt that this team had too many leaks in terms of getting insider knowledge. Maybe that's something we could touch on a little bit in terms of what type of content out there. But in terms of how the team is being covered not by mainstream media, for the lack of a better word, but the aspiring media, maybe that's a better word. What are you seeing right now? What's your observation on that?
I don't think a lot has changed. I think, mostly the perception heading into this offseason was trepidation, and then panic, and then what Treliving has done has allayed that panic a lot. So I think there's still some hope heading into this season. At least there's a high level of interest to see how this experiment's going to play out, just because I've never actually seen an offseason quite like this for the Flames in a long time, or perhaps ever. So there's definitely still a high level of interest. Just, okay, let's see what happens here.
Yeah, and I get, but do you find, I guess, also with, are you finding a lot of, maybe this will blend into something about your 6 general content types, about like the kind of some hot takey, like, what are your thoughts on the hot takey stuff out there? Like, I don't know if I'm making any sense with what I'm saying there, because I can't think of, like, I can think of a specific hot take, but there's, I guess, stuff out there that is trying to get attention, as opposed to maybe stuff that maybe come across a little bit more thoughtfully. Like, what are your thoughts on the difference? Can you see a difference in that, or, like, from your observation?
Yeah, I don't see a lot of that in the Calgary market, at least in the indie area. I mean, everyone has, differing opinions that they work through in their content or in public spheres like Twitter. But honestly, you might see more of that in the mainstream media in Calgary than in. And you probably know what I'm talking about, but yeah, I find the creator sort of media in Calgary is pretty even keel most of the time, which is interesting because you don't have that in all markets. There's definitely some out there with let's say, more passionate fans who will put out more interesting levels of opinion.
Yeah, that's it is, especially living out here, seeing there, I do see quite a stark difference in terms of respondents to things. It's quite fascinating how to see that. Like, and you're right, I think most part the Flames media has been, the commentary around the Flames and around the Flames Twitter sphere it's been kind of an emotional time, especially with everything, the changes that have happened. But I haven't really felt like anybody has taken anything too extreme too much. But and that's, I think, that's a compliment, I think, to the Calgary, to the landscape, I think, in my mind. So you talked about 6 general content types. You talked about commentary, you talked about curation, you talked about education, you talked about insider, you talked about humor, data, resources. How do you find that people are going to land in one of the 6, or do you find that that people are going to hit on all 6 of these at some particular point in time? And one guy I'm thinking of in this is Ryan Pike. I find that he probably, in a lot of ways, is one of the guys that uses all 6 in different ways. That's a guy I use as an example. But do you find that people are going to land in one of those, or is it important to kind of diversify? How do you see that?
I find usually that creators take off, dominate in one of those. Aside from commentary, like, commentary is table stakes. Everyone provides commentary in sports, even people who aren't getting paid for it. So that's highly saturated, and you're going to have to do it if you're in sports media, but it's very hard to just only be commentary and get anywhere because everyone does it. But the other stuff, usually you're doing 1 or 2 of those better or more than the other stuff. Think of the resource people that are out there, visual guys doing visualizations, guys doing databases. They're creating models. They mostly do that. They definitely do other things. Commentary is, of course, one of them. But like for me, I started in commentary, obviously, when I started my own blog, because that's usually where you start as well. But I went into the heavy numbers and analyst type of stuff, because that was the niche that I found traction. That's what was sort of coming up at the time, and that's what I'm known for. Even though, honestly, when I was in school, I liked statistics and math class the least, to tell you the truth.
Oh, me too. I was like, we had a stats class. I'm like, really? Oh man,
gotta do it. But yeah,
Got it.
I didn't love them, but
and with that, I also think with all six, and maybe this will blend us a little bit into the value part of our conversation here. The importance of, there's so much talk about what a journalist is right now in this space. Who's a journalist, who's not. I'm not getting into that, but I do want wonder what your thoughts are on, no matter where you're at on this, using some sort of journalistic integrity in terms of what you're talking about, and why do you think that's important? Why do you think that's important? And what your thoughts are around that?
yeah. So I think one of the other threads I put together, I sort of put a ladder together in terms of what, as you're moving up as a creator, what you should expect. And it's interest first, value next, credibility, and then authority. And once you get sort of up to those other tiers, that's when you can start really generating an audience, really getting paid. People will bring you onto their shows, that sort of thing. I don't think you can get to those other tiers if you don't have integrity. If you have an audience that can't trust what you're saying, if you're bouncing around all the time, if you're lying about things, if you're doing things for clicks and virality over actual value, eventually that will collapse beneath you. I think it's best to be earnest and honest and confident in what you're doing once you get going. It's hard to do that sometimes, and there's people out there doing stuff for clicks, no matter what it's worth. But I think it's better long term to have trust from the people who are consuming your content.
On that point of views and clicks and reads, that is a stat that's the stat that probably has the most fact-based to it in some ways. But I heard Elliot Friedman say this once. He doesn't care. Well, I mean, it's easy for him on probably the most popular podcast in hockey today to say he doesn't really care about the views. But what I thought was interesting about it is, at least with Elliot Friedman, you know what you're going to get from him consistently, no matter where he's at, right?
Mm-hmm.
But so, how do you look at views? Like, because there are going to be things that we've all had that just will not generate the views of something else that has, and that kind of can get into your head a little bit. Maybe it gets into my head a little bit, and I've been fight that off sometimes. But what are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on numbers of views? How do you look at that in a pro and a con way?
Yeah, it's definitely a form of feedback that you have to take seriously. But like Elliot, when I first started and I started getting into advanced stats and things like that, it was pretty unpopular, to tell you the truth. Except for the small cadre of people that were doing it and talking about it. It was not like, if you're doing SEO and fancy things to look at what's popular in this group right now that I can write about and get to the top of the view list, it wouldn't have been that. And I wouldn't have found my niche. I wouldn't have become the creator that I am now. So I went forward with things that interested me first, and I could honestly talk about them in a way that I thought was fundamentally interesting and providing value, even if right now it wasn't that popular. Now it became a wave that I was able to ride, but in the short term, at least, it didn't matter to me as much that I couldn't go on hockey's futures message boards and talk about it and have everyone go, yeah, you're right. Because at that time, most people laughed at that stuff. So if you're doing something you believe in, that interests you and you think is providing value long term, that's more important than getting the views up right now.
Yeah, I like that, and I liked what you said about. I like what you said there about it. If it interests you, because you come from a place of passion, it will resonate everybody else, as opposed to writing what everybody wants
exactly
to hear.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that there has to be there's a balance with that. Like, you can't be a twit online necessarily, but you got to come from a place of passion and value. And analytics has completely taken. Like, I remember when analytics first came up. I mean, a lot of people. You're right. I remember rolling my eyes at this now, and now it's a fundamental part of all podcasts. I think, Sean and our podcast is probably our most passionate, passionate about the analyst. He looks at that a lot more than any of us, and that's sort of, I think, one of the edges that he brings there as well. But in terms of that, so you're right. But and it's the passion of being yourself allows other people to connect with you.
Yeah, and it usually helps you build a niche or a voice a lot better than just trying to find what's popular right now, because then you bounce around, you're chasing after things. So back in the day, I conducted my own personal research on things like scoring chances and who was on the ice, and I spent hours doing it. And then over time, people started coming to my blog because I was the only one doing things like that, and then talking about it as intelligently as possible. So it's over time, you definitely want an audience. You can't have audience without views, but don't chase views.
Yeah. And I guess how do you then know that you're bringing value? I guess that's a very, you start the value to adhere, some ways to bring value to audience. How do you know? What at the end of the day, you lay your head on your pillow and you're done for the day? Or how do you know you've brought value yourself to an audience? What is some samples that you do for that?
It just builds over time. So, I think I had probably 30 regular readers after my first year or so blogging. And that even though I thought that was kind of cool, even that anyone was reading my stuff regularly at all and I didn't start out with any sort of ambition to be paid in sports. I was just doing it because it was interesting and fun. And then you see that grow quantitatively, but also qualitatively. I had people that started posting on my stuff regularly, and then I started having people ask me when something would happen in and around the team, be it on social or on my own blog. This just happened. What do you think? So you start getting an audience might be wrong. Community might be more on the nose. And I talk about community building long term as the real thing you want to do as a content creator. And the other thing is when I would write something that I found fundamentally interesting, I started seeing other people showing up going, this is interesting, let's talk about it. So you start getting that kind of flywheel in motion where you get excited about something, you put it out there, and you find out a few other people are excited about it too. And then you just grow up from there, honestly.
Mm. What currently, you talk about one of the tweets here that it also helps to find blue oceans or gaps in the existing landscape. In your mind, what is missing from, what are some of the blue oceans or gaps you're seeing right now in hockey content?
Well, it can vary by region. Sometimes one team is heavily covered, like Toronto or Edmonton. There's red oceans everywhere because there's just so many fans doing things, and Calgary is probably a little different, but I think a lot of it is going to emerge around gameplay, in between periods. There's a lot of activity right now that happens around that, but it's unstructured. I think someone could do a lot, layering something on top of a broadcast or doing in between period summaries, because I think everyone's interested in the game as it happens. I think the existing broadcast content that happens in broadcast mostly sucks, to tell you the truth, especially if you're a hardcore fan. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. In Calgary specifically, I think you could do any of the stuff that I was talking about. And if you do it well, you're going to get an audience moving forward, especially as that vacuum appears with the existing broadcasters kind of pulling out. So there's curation. You could do heavy curation here in Calgary, sum everything up for a hardcore fan, frame it properly, give them 1 or 2 newsletters a week. There's education, it could be education around tactics. It could be education around scouting or prospects. Even if I still get emailed from people asking about advanced stats, even though I'm not actively doing all of this anymore. People email me, can you tell me, like, I don't quite understand what this or that is. So there's huge opportunities around education around advanced stats still in hockey. So yeah, still lots of blue oceans out there, I think. And we don't even know the ones that'll come up here again. They sort of emerge over time.
Yeah, I think it's the in broadcast, especially with Twitter. Canuck Clay Emo, we've had him on our show, friend of the show. He's done some Twitter Spaces in between intermissions that I think have been very effective for the Vancouver Canuck market. I just have a tremendous amount of respect of a guy I think that is completely done things the right way in a completely respectful way. He's not been a very angry fan, even though if you're following the Canucks and the last 7 years has been something. He hasn't shown that. He hasn't been angry. And I think I've been thinking about that a bit, but one of the things that everyone does, and I do it too, is the Twitter tweeting during the game. And I was kind of thinking about this a little bit about how I feel that in some ways the way I do it is pretty ineffective. And how does one effectively tweet during the game? Like what is when you're tweeting during the game? Like is it relevant? Like what are your thoughts around
that? Some of it is being part of the fabric of what's happening. So if you can have your finger on the pulse, seeing what the perception is amongst fans and even some of the media, and then filling gaps. That's basically all I've ever done. I'll see what people are saying about the game, and I might see 9 out of 10 people with a perception of X. If I look into it and go, I don't agree, and here's why. I think this is actually what's happening. Bing, bing, bing. Put a thread together. That's the way I operate. I look at where perceptions maybe actually misperceptions, what observations are being passed around, which I think could be corrected or could be leveraged to get to a bigger insight. So that's always been the way I've done things. And then on the Big Body Presence, which is my Flames community that I run on Discord, there's an entire sort of back and forth with everyone who's in the game thread. And then there's people who have very specific roles during the game thread. We have someone who posts, who has a really good setup, so he can do highlights, and he posts them in-game thread as they happen, and then we discuss. And sometimes it's not a goal or an assist, it's what happened during that rush just there, and we break it down in the community to each other.
So it becomes more about that than it does about the public. That's interesting.
Well, if I find something in that community that I think is interesting and I don't see it being talked about elsewhere, I can go on Twitter and leverage it and say, hey, here's what we're talking about, and here's the highlight package that this guy put together, and let's go over this, right?
Yeah. That's interesting. That's an interesting idea there. And unique in that sense, I guess, in terms of how people look at it. Because I mean, I'm just going in my head. I mean, someone like I think of Hailey Salvian, and anytime that Anya Mangiapane scored a goal, we got the bread cat yeehaw. But she always found some way to kind of add some humor into it. Sea of Red Central, I think, does a fantastic job of just giving the information out there. Ryan Pike, I think, does a really good job of breaking the games down. Not that Kristen, I think she's just so. I can't help but laugh at her stuff every time she posts. It's just either way. I do think there's a lot of people bringing that value, but I kind of struggle with where, like, I kind of struggle in some ways with feeling the obligation to tweet, like, oh, I'm watching the hockey game, so I should tweet something about it. And
right,
I maybe in some ways it's sometimes silence is golden. I don't know. Yeah.
Luckily, I'm not in the game anymore, so if I don't want to tweet about hockey, I won't.
Yeah. And then to blend this, I guess, in terms of value into generating revenue. First of all, I guess right now, in terms of people that you're seeing in currently creating the podcasts, are we seeing a lot more newer, younger broadcast students try to get into the podcast game, or are we seeing a bit more of the former broadcasters who have moved on from their radio station for whatever reason enter into the podcast realm? What are we seeing more of?
I think we're going to see both. I see a lot more young people right now, but as I think we're going to see Rhett Warner, Dean Malberg, and probably Ryan Pinder crop up with a independent project here pretty soon. It wouldn't surprise me at all. Yeah, and as more of these talents kind of get either cut or leave existing traditional broadcasting, it wouldn't surprise me at all to see them crop up with their own publications or their own sort of podcast networks. You've sort of seen that with Steve Dangle's podcast network, where he's teamed up with Adam Wilde and Chris Johnson, and they've sort of built this new wave of media company, which is really fascinating. If people haven't looked into what they're doing, they should, who have any interest in this area. And they're another group that has this massive Discord community, which is pretty fascinating to see. So I'm really watching them to see if there's kind of a new, they're paving a new path or not.
Steve Dangle, it's fascinating to watch what happened with Steve Dangle. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean that in a compliment. I mean, this is a guy that he acted completely like a fan. Like, he really did. He raged his way through. And I think this is a guy, he caught Leaf fans, but I also think he caught a lot of outside of Leaf fans just because of the way he talked so honestly about hockey. Like, that was, you talk about a guy that found some value in what he did. It may have looked a little shticky maybe to some on the outside, but he really has delved in so well. And it's, I think what he's done is I agree with you. I think it's really fascinating to watch what he's done in the community, and the work that he's done has been quite fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, the one half of Steve Dangle stuff is him just taking YouTube and podcasting and making a brand out of it over time. But the other half, which you don't see as much, is what he's done in the background to leverage that going forward. And you probably have to talk to him to discuss how he made the brand through YouTube initially, but then how he's opened so many doors with that brand over time, showing up on Sportsnet and now the podcast network. And like, that's the more interesting journey from my perspective than even the first half, than him just getting big on YouTube.
Yeah, the second half for me is interesting too. And I wonder, I know that this is part of, we're going through revenue, but maybe this is a bit of a rabbit trail, but I'm curious what you're thinking about this. Mm-hmm. I wonder if the media has missed the opportunity to support the podcast community in that same way that Dangle, how Dangle has helped, like in every other market, including Calgary, Vancouver, where they've kind of go in, hey, say, look, we'll support we're going to come and support your podcast. We'll give you some mentorship. We'll give you some feedback. We'll help you build that up? Has that been missed, or is that happening and I'm missing it? What are you seeing there?
No, that's, as far as I know, that's not happening. And actually, a big part of, I think, publications and media companies moving forward should be talent recruitment and development, kind of like a hockey team, drafting, doing well in the draft and developing their own talent it's long term. It's a lot healthier for you. I mean, speaking of Steve Dangle, I don't know how much it costs to work with him right now, but it would have been a lot better if you had, as a media company, identified Steve Dangle earlier on and then, taken him up to where he is now, right? And I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with recruitment and development. The Athletic kind of did this when they came forward. They saw a lot of talent kind of laying on the ground and scattered all over the place and scooped a lot of it up, including traditional and conventional guys. But I started there as well at the time. But their model of only subscription, I don't know if that's going to last either. I think you have to have multiple revenue streams, especially if you're a big publication and media like that. But yeah, I think finding talent and developing talent is going to be huge moving forward.
Yeah, I agree. And then I guess in terms of that part of it, the way to create revenue is obviously to create attention or get the right attention and get noticed by said people. What are people that are doing well, and what are people that are not doing well? What is being missed in terms of that? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'll say if you are a creator or a publication right now and you are making money, you're doing well. It's very difficult to do in the first place. Even if you're a freelancer or you've gotten a job somewhere, congratulations. It's not easy at all. I think long term, anyone who's looking at subscription only or anyone who's looking at traffic only, by which I mean selling banner ads and just sort of passive digital advertising, those are really tough models to make work all by themselves. I think you have to have multiple revenue streams, starting at sponsorship if possible, potentially subscription, and then premium events, premium merch, premium content. You can layer all these sort of revenue streams on top. But yeah, it's making money is tough, and if you only have one sort of generic revenue stream, that makes it tough long term. I think you want to have two at least moving forward.
Two being like in terms of like podcast / writing, or
it could be, you could be doing one thing on one channel, but maybe if you're podcasting and you're publishing it on YouTube, you get some of that passive digital advertising. But maybe you also get direct sponsorship. So you get big enough and you start working with regional brands who want to be out there. So there's lots of pizza places, pubs, microbreweries in Calgary specifically, who, even if you're not doing 1 million views a month, could probably like to be in front of a sports heavy audience, right? So yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Fair. It's developing those relationships with people and getting to that. What are in terms of, there's some people going into the Patreon model has been around for 4 or 5 years, really a bit stronger. You've got some other things like, can I buy you a coffee out there? Right. What are your thoughts on those, using those as models of revenue stream?
I think they're tough to potentially build a real career around, but what they're useful for is a signal. So if you put that up and you find some people are paying you even just voluntarily like that, it starts to say that you are creating value, you do have an audience, and maybe you can further leverage it for other revenue down the road here.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess with maybe with this comes feeling the revenue, and all of this comes the feeling of competition feeling like you are competing with other content creators. I know that's something I battle with in my own head. Is I'll look at our views, I'll look at their views, and sometimes I feel a little bit up and down depending on all of that. Kind of the mentality around that. What's your perspective on competition, feeling competent? Maybe the succinct way of my question is, what's the difference between competition and community?
Yeah, the funny thing is I never felt like I was competing with anyone ever when I was writing about the Flames. I always felt like it was a potentially positive sum game for everyone who is not only a Flames fan, but a Flames fan actively creating content. I always embraced everyone in the community as much as possible, even if they weren't working directly with me, be it at Matchsticks and Gasoline or Flames Nation or anywhere else I was at. Because I think a high tide raises all boats, especially in this sort of game. And eventually some people did start working with me because down the road I was able to recruit them for whatever it was I was doing. So I always look to grow relationships, create relationships, and make, I think the healthier the ecosystem is around Flames content creation, especially in the indie crowd, the better it is for everyone long term.
Yeah, I feel the same. Yeah, I feel the same way. And but sometimes the ego gets in the way, and that's and you're looking at. I don't always. I kind of stay away from numbers in some ways. I'm like, okay, I look at this. I'm like, oh, that video went well, and this one didn't. But I think that just relates to promotion though too, and how to effectively promote and have other people promote your product. How did you start promoting your product, and in terms of promotion, what has transitioned over time for you?
It was very much, once I got kind of established as somebody, sometimes it was just going into bigger communities and participating. So Battle of Alberta was the big blog back in the day, in the very early going. So I would just comment there on occasion, and sometimes I'd get stuff from there. And then I found ways to contribute to bigger publications in mine. So over time, in between Flames Nation and my first blog, I appeared on Yahoo Sports, The Score, the Calgary Herald. Eventually I got well enough that I could go out in front of much bigger audiences and present myself, which didn't cost me anything. Sometimes I got paid for it, sometimes I didn't. It was just exposure, but finding ways to get in front of bigger audiences is super helpful without having to spend on anything. Now, these days there are really interesting, comprehensive ways to build out your distribution. There could be paid ads if you have enough money to actually pay on YouTube or Facebook to present your stuff, but there's newsletters which have built-in email distribution, and sometimes they have referral engines in them so that you get your readers to share your stuff with other people. So, and the reason I added that thread was because I think this part of it is, one, the least well known by content creators because all they want to concentrate on is the stuff they're making, and two, it's the biggest opportunity long term to make what you're doing into something that pays you either on the side or as a career.
And the three business layers: revenue sources, distribution, and community, which I think we've touched on that. Right. And I think I know a few that have used Patreon, and if they're making, I don't know if they're making life salary with it, but they seem to be doing pretty well at it. So it's fascinating. Yeah. And, fascinating in terms of that, but we're like, I guess maybe the last question on this entirely is, when we're having this conversation at the end of August 2023, in terms of where the media landscape is, do you have a sense of where we're going here?
Yeah, I think over time, we're going to go away from that traditional model of, you get in with a big outfit, be it a big broadcaster or a big radio station or a big newspaper, and you work your way up, and then you get a megaphone and you become big because you get to stand on that giant soapbox. And I think future media and publications will be like talent agencies, where they will, the people with the power will be the content creators who have an audience, a sticky audience. And then the publications and the media companies will just be there to manage things in the background. They won't be the brand. The brand will be who are the content creators, who are the stars or the talent that are part of this publication or media body, which is something that Steve Dangle Podcast Network has kind of taken and run with. And I think that long term is going to be the main way sports publications work or media companies.
Yeah, we're in a very it's a very fascinating time. Like it used to, I was thinking about this, and when I'm a bit older, so I can say this. I remember going to bed at night and grabbing my radio and listening to Peter Maher on the radio on the Flames games. And now, that's just not part of our vernacular anymore. I don't it's a very different. It's very different, and it continues to be different. And we're seeing a lot of different models out there from a number of different sports organizations. We look at the Hamilton Tiger Cats; they're going in-house. I mean, there's questions that there's some NHL teams going in-house. I mean, I'm sure even universities and colleges around both Canada and the States are asking questions, and we're getting new TV networks coming up here, little smaller TV networks coming up. We're in a really fascinating, exciting time where there's not just one way to create content anymore, and it's different, and I feel like you have to kind of keep up and adjust, and I would suggest that that's everybody, even the bigger media conglomerates right now, I think, and that's what's so fascinating is everything is changing as we're speaking.
Yeah, absolutely. The sands are shifting all the time, which is why it's so interesting. I mean, the threads I put together was just me writing stuff down in a notebook every so often, just because even though I have another day job, I keep one eye on what's happening in sports media.
For sure. And I'm grateful for you to do that. It would be silly for me not to chat with you a little, Flames, here just for a couple quick minutes here. I guess overall, you talked about this before. I mean, this is for the most dramatic offseason of changes this team has had in years. Probably, I'm not even remember just this huge of an offseason in terms of the names that have been transitioned here. Where are you feeling the Flames are at a better place, worse place, different place now? Where are your thoughts on where the Flames are right now?
I don't know if it's better, but it's definitely they've staved off Armageddon. Let's just put it that way. The way Treliving had structured the contracts was this summer was always going to be something big, because to keep all of those guys as they were expiring here was going to be very expensive. So there's going to have to be some sort of backfill of the depth. Or I wasn't really sure what he was going to do to keep the band together. He couldn't do that. He was forced to become more creative, and I think at least it really looked like they're going to be forced into a full-on rebuild when we heard about Gaudreau leaving, and then Tkachuk came out and said, "I'm not staying here either." But I think they can still compete, seriously compete, at least for the next few years. And I think long term there's still a lot of questions about what this team's going to do, but at least they can challenge for the top of the Pacific and maybe do a few more cup runs here in the next few years, which is clearly what the goal usually is internally with the Flames. They typically do not want to rebuild at all.
No, I mean, no. And I know that was a whole fascinating debate. And, this is sort of blends in some ways, because I think there's one generation that is like, nah, we're not rebuild. That's not a good idea. And I think the younger generation was open to that conversation of doing a really proper introspective rebuild and getting some proper draft picks there. But ultimately, I think once you get Jonathan Huberdeau and Mackenzie Weegar, I think all bets are off, and you're in for the long term here. But and then you get Calgary as we head to training camp here. Even the young stars, it's only 2-3 weeks away. What are you anticipating here? What is the kind of? I mean, I think there has to be. I would think with 10 defensemen, you've got to make some sort of move before the season starts in terms of improving forward. Or what are some of the things you're keeping an eye out with the Flames right now?
Well, the right wing is still pretty bad. If you look at the depth chart, it's not that good at all. I don't know what they're going to do with some of their high-performing kids. So you've got, Peltier, who I think the team really likes a lot and could press for a roster spot. But you also have Matthew Phillips, who is eligible for waivers this year. So if he doesn't make the team, does he get claimed on waivers when he gets sent down? Same with Valimaki, right? I think Ruzicka might also be waivers eligible. So they have a lot of questions to answer kind of at the bottom of the roster there, and not a lot of spots for kids to play. So the right wing is a huge question mark for Calgary, just because they don't have a lot of naturally right shooting guys and not a lot of talent over there. But yeah, the bottom of the roster also, it's what are you going to do with all these kids? And, probably they're not going to make the team. Do you put them on waivers and pray?
One of the things with Daryl that is a myth, I think, is becoming a little bit of a myth, is he doesn't play young guys. If you look at his 2 or 3 Stanley Cup final teams, they actually were younger than the league average. They were both. So I don't know if. I mean, I think a lot of people are saying Pelche will be down in the minors or should be down. I think he's going to give Pelche a little bit of a longer look. I think that, he played Ruzicka a lot more than maybe a lot of people expected that to happen. And you look at Oliver Shillington, he worked his way into that lineup. I don't know. I think he's going to, I don't think he's averse to playing these young kids. I think that there's a perception he's averse to playing young kids because we perceive Daryl and veterans, but I don't know if that's true.
Yeah, the issue with Sutter, there's 2 things. One, he's a hard marker.
Yeah.
You have it's a high bar to clear for him to trust you and get in the active roster every night. But the other thing is the tie goes to the veteran, right? So if you're not clearly outplaying the guy he knows and likes, like Trevor Lewis or something, you're not going to get in. So it was funny last year to see how Shillington got into the roster. He had a really, really good training camp, probably one of the best training camps of any skater on the team, which helped, but he was still a healthy scratch to start the season. And Nikita Zadorov had a horrible first 10 games. He was absolutely horrendous, which opened the door for Shillington. And then when Shillington came in, he was great, almost right away. He was clearly better for Tanev, and then the rest is history. So the kids need something like that. They need to have a really good training camp. They need to stand out. And then when they get an opportunity, they have to take it. And part of the problem last year, especially at forward, is the entire team was so healthy all year. There was not a lot of opportunities, especially on the wings, for kids to come up and have 10 games where they stood out, right? Because Calgary was the healthiest team in the league aside from the 2 weeks where they all had COVID. So I don't think that'll happen this year, and there may be more opportunities. We'll see.
Yeah. I think the other question that I don't think is getting enough conversation, but I think that there's an obvious answer, and then you look at what happened with Markstrom in the playoffs. I wonder how much we see Dan Vladar this year.
Yeah, me too. I actually wanted to see more of him last year, especially when the Flames were kind of cruising at the end, the last quarter of the season. I didn't think playing the backup was high risk at that point. You wanted him to get more comfortable. You wanted to be more comfortable with him just to see how he could perform in different things. So yeah, and you're right. Once they got into the second round, Markstrom had a really, really tough 7 or 10 days or whatever that was there. Yeah. So it would be interesting to see a little bit more of Vladar maybe they can trust him a little more, right?
Yeah, that's. I mean, he didn't have the experience really to come in, and I think now he does. And Markstrom is in his early 30s. I think you got to play him a little bit less. Like, I know Sutter's philosophy on this is just play him until he's dead, but you know he's not a horse, so you know.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want your starting goalie to be absolutely exhausted by the time the second round starts, right?
Yeah. Well, Kent, this was great. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. I know that you've been getting a lot of interview time, so I'm really glad that you've taken the time with us here. How can people follow you, contact you, if they have any questions about what you're talking about?
Yeah, best place is on Twitter if you have it. It's Kent_Wilson. It's just my name. So you can find me on Discord too under Big Body Presence. That's our Flames community that it's a little dead right now because there's not much to talk about. But every time something happens, it stirs up again. So yeah, those are the two best ways.
Awesome. Well, Kent, thank you very much for joining us. Of course, you can follow us all individually on Twitter as well. Tyler TNOBLE, Sean Beardy Canuck 03, Devin Gordhowe 09, Chris Schneid's SCHNEIDZ. I am KEVOLE. Shifts and Pucks on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, wherever you get your audio, as well as on the Area 51 Sports Network. We will be back tomorrow with our regularly scheduled podcast. So please join us for that. And thanks everyone for watching, listening, and we will talk to you all very soon. Bye for now.